Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering the Boeing 737 pneumatic systems. It's been a while since I've uploaded, but here I am again. So, let's talk a bit about the pneumatic systems on board the Boeing 737. So you can see here you've got your ground air supply unit at the top. We'll be looking at more in-depth schematics later on in the video. Over on this side, we've got the cross bleed valve, which is basically your isolation valve there. Your pre-cooler, your bleed valve, your high pressure valve, and your intermediate pressure valve. So here's just a basic run over of what we're going to be looking at today. I'm also going to be covering the air conditioning systems as well. So if we move on. We'll cover that in a second. Let's have a look at this one. So this is Avsoft that have made this schematic. It's they've done a good job here. Although there's one mistake which I'll point out in a second. Looking closer, on the left we've got the cowl anti-ice. Now this is your engine anti-ice. That little yellow dot there indicates the probe that will tell the flight deck if it's on or off. You've got your 5th stage and your 9th stage bleed. So your 5th stage is your intermediate pressure and your 9th stage is your high pressure. Cowl anti-ice shut-off valve there, that will of course toggle it on and on depending on if you select it in the flight deck. The whole pneumatic system comes from the bleeds. There's no doubt about that. And you might ask, what's the 5th and 9th stage for? Well, if the intermediate pressure isn't applying enough pressure, the high pressure valve will kick in. The start valve there, that's connected to the APU, but let's just have a look at the bleed trip sensors here. So the bleed trip sensors, of course, will indicate if there's a bleed trip through pressurization or temperature. If it exceeds 254 degrees Celsius, the bleeds will trip off. Now, we'll move into what causes that when we actually have a look at the Boeing 737 pressurization panel. Now, if you notice something here, every other element of the pressurization goes through the pre-cooler, except from the cowl anti-ice and the wing anti-ice. But on here, it seems that they've labelled it that the wing anti-ice goes through the pre-cooler. This isn't correct. So, if we have a look now, moving further on, the auxiliary power unit supplies air to the left pack. And again, the isolation valve is your cross bleed. If it's open, air will run freely in between each bleed. The duct pressure transmitter there as well is to indicate to the flight deck the duct pressure, which you can see on the pressurization panel. It's just a little gauge. And like most things with the auxiliary power unit on board most aircraft and the 737, it runs on the left-hand side, just like the left aft fuel pump fuels the auxiliary power unit as well. So here's the isolation valve again. You can see that. The pneumatic ground cart will run through the mixed manifold in order to supply pressurization, and of course you can also do a cross bleed engine start with this. I'll do a tutorial on how to do that in the upcoming weeks. So as you can see here, we've got system A hydraulic. Again, it supplies many things like the sidewalls, the pneumatic system, pressurization, air conditioning, pressurizing the hydraulics, pressurizing the water tank, the brakes, which are also come from the hydraulics as well. Now, if you have a look at both the hydraulic systems here, we've got System A and System B. Now, System A is undoubtedly the smaller hydraulic out of the both of them. System B runs 4.7 to 5.7 litres of hydraulic fluid, henceforth it being a more major one. Now, what's clever about the design of the Boeing 737 is, when you look at the pneumatic system, the left engine bleed handles System A. Now, the left engine bleed has a much higher workload than the right bleed, so that is why it powers the hydraulic System A reservoir. System B, on the other hand, is handled by the right bleed over here. The water tank is also pressurised by the left engine bleed as well. And all this air on the respective sides goes to each pack. Here's a little picture of the ground AC unit, ACU, supplying air through the mixed manifold. This is roughly about 5 to 6 feet away from the wheel well. You can see just below it there is the beacon light. Okay, so if you have a look up there, you can see the temperature gauge. If you switch that little knob around there, you can actually see all the different temperatures in different areas of the flight deck and the cabin. Now here's a little, these are the amber indications here: cabin altitude, takeoff config, speed brakes extended, and below glide slope push to inhibit. We're only going to be looking at cabin altitude today, so if your packs are off or your packs trip off, or you've got a pack fault, the packs can't trip off, but if you have a pack fault, then the pack overheat as well. That's another thing, which is why the ram air is there. It's to cool the packs down. The ram air inlet, which is located just on the underbelly of the new generation 737. So, as we can see here, if you get a cabin altitude warning, that's not good. The oxygen mass will automatically drop, and of course, those can only supply the cabin and the flight deck with 12 minutes of pressurised air. 12 minutes of breathable oxygen. So that would lead to a rapid descent, an emergency descent, and that's a holiday ruined. So it can even be caused as something as clumsy. It can be caused by clumsiness if the pilot flying or the pilot monitoring doesn't turn the packs on, or they forget to do that during the flows, during the checklists. That can lead to a cabin altitude warning. Here's the Boeing 737 new generation pressurization panel. So this is where you control your cabin altitude here. Again, this is part of the pressurization panel. If the auto mode fails, switch to alternate. In a rapid descent, you're going to have to switch to manual and control and bring the cabin pressure under control manually through the ram air door. Again, the cabin altitude indicator there is to the left, and if it exceeds 9.28, that's bad news. Here's the mixing manifold, as I was talking about before, how it comes through the ground air source there. On each respected side, again, you've got your left and right pack systems. So here is the engine here, thermal anti-ice, just as we was discussing before. And don't let all of this confuse you, because most of this information has been added on for extra. Not all of it is critical on here. So don't get wound up with all these things here. You can see the B system reservoir there and the System A reservoir respectively. Here's the ram air inlet door and the deflector door. This can open and close throughout the flight to regulate cabin pressure. going back now, we're going to have a look at the main pressurisation panel on board the aircraft. So, as you can see here, you've got your dual bleed warning. A dual bleed can be a sign of damage to the APU. On the ground, it's fine. There's no issues with that. That's box standard. Ram air full open, again, that's normal on the ground. It should go off after climb. If it doesn't, you may want to have a look at a pack problem there as well. The packs can be very hot. Recirculation fans reduce pack load. We know this. And there's the pressure indicator I was talking about with the duct pressure before on the other schematic there, right in the middle. On the right of that, you'll see the overheat test. This is usually performed by engineers on the first flight of the day if there's a wing body overheat, just to make sure that the system is fail-safe. This can be done by the pilot flying or the pilot monitoring, usually done by the first officer, as it's his workload. And this, of course, will, if you hold it down for 5 seconds, you'll see the indication. This is also labelled just like the schematic sort of, because you can see here, if you look at the APU bleed in the middle down here, you can see how that links up to the left pack, that line there. What are the indications on here? Well, if we have a look down there, pack, wing body overheat and bleed trip off. So pack, again, your packs have overheated, or there's a pack fault, switch to alternate. If that doesn't work, switch to manual on the pressurization control panel. Bleed trip off. Now, another thing that can cause a bleed trip besides temperature and pressurization is if you turn the wing anti-ice on at a high altitude. If you turn it on at 35,000 feet, that will greatly increase your chances of experiencing a bleed trip off. So use the wing anti-ice when it's needed and turn it off when it's not. Coming down here now to the isolation valve, you can see here that there's 2 indicators on the pressurization panel. Each indicator is for each respective bleed and pack. The isolation valve on the ground will be open for engine start. If it's in auto, it will go off its own logic. Left pack and right pack. So if one pack fails on the Boeing 737 new generation, the other pack will automatically switch to high workload. And there's both the engine bleeds at the bottom, turn them on and off respectively. It'll turn it on through the shut-off valve. We'll have a look at this in a real picture, but here's a little diagram / schematic showing the engine start valve there. So if you want to take a look at that, you can do. Okay, so here is the engine start valve that will run through the bleeds here in order to start the engines. And the reason, again, if we go back here, the reason the packs have to be off for engine start is so sufficient pressure is there for the engine starter, because otherwise, if you've got air flowing through the cabin and the flight deck, that's not sufficient for starting the engines. The cargo bay is pressurised, but it's not actually air conditioned. Cargo aircraft will usually have air conditioning on board. That's not the case with the Boeing 737 NG. So this is a picture from the Boeing 737 NG. Again, this will be a older, not older, I've made a mistake there. This will be a picture from a shorter body 737. So the 400, the 800 and the 900 all include 2 recirculation fans. The trip reset, of course, will reset the indication. So, of course, 2 recirculation fans, the packs are working harder on the longer body aircraft.